Most logging legends skip the bodies buried beneath the stumps. In America's timber boom, men climbed 200 feet into ancient giants, armed with only steel spurs and a leather strap to carve off the crowns. Nearly every one of them died, a sacrifice erased from the industry's official story. But what pushed thousands into a job with no return? And why do so few know the true cost of these vanished tree toppers? The answer begins with trees no one thought could fall. If you're ready to face the danger behind the myth, keep watching, because what happened at the top was only the start. Subscribe for more untold histories. Leave a comment with your thoughts on risking everything for a day's pay. And share this story before these names fade forever. In the heart of the Pacific Northwest, the forest floor disappears beneath a wall of living wood. Douglas firs and western red cedars rise straight up, their trunks stretching 10, sometimes 12 feet across. From the ground, the tops vanish into a green haze, 200, even 300 feet above. These trees are older than the towns nearby, older than the railroads that finally brought men and machines into their shadows. Some have stood for 1,000 years, their bark thick as armor, their branches tangled in the clouds. Measured from root to crown, many of these giants reach heights that dwarf city buildings. 200 feet is common, 300 not unheard of. A single log cut from the base could fill a train car. When the wind moves through the canopy, the trees sway and groan, their tops bending in arcs that seem impossible for something so massive. Each trunk is a column of living history, layered with centuries of storms, fires, and silent growth. For loggers, at the turn of the 20th century, these trees presented a challenge unlike any other. Felling them whole was a gamble. The sheer weight and length meant that when they hit the ground, they often shattered, splintering valuable timber and sending deadly shards in every direction. The scale of these forests demanded new methods, new risks, and a kind of courage that most would never know. In these woods, the ordinary rules of work and danger did not apply. The trees themselves set the terms. By the late 1800s, the forests of the Midwest had been stripped bare. Eyes turned west, where the Pacific Northwest still held millions of untouched acres. Everything changed after 1880. Railroads pushed deeper into the region, laying track through mountains and across rivers, making it possible to haul timber out of places that had once seemed unreachable. Logging camps sprang up almost overnight, fueled by a hunger for lumber that stretched from San Francisco to Chicago and beyond. Demand surged with every new city, every mile of railroad, every factory needing beams and boards. By 1930, annual timber production in the region reached 30 million board feet, a number almost impossible to picture. The First World War sent demand even higher, as the government ordered spruce and fir for ships, barracks, and airplane frames. Contracts from the War Department meant crews worked around the clock, felling trees as fast as they could be moved, cut, and shipped east. Speed was everything. Mills paid bonuses for every extra carload. Timber companies raced to outcut their rivals, pushing crews to clear entire valleys in a single season. The pressure was relentless. With each passing year, the industry reached further into the forest, tackling trees larger and taller than ever before. The old methods, axes and brute force, could not keep up with the pace. Something new had to be tried to feed the booming market and keep the profits flowing. By 1892, the old ways of logging had reached their limit. Timber companies, desperate to profit from the tallest trees on the continent, issued new orders. A memo from Pacific Timber that year spelled it out. Cut the crowns, 50, sometimes 100 feet, before felling, or risk losing whole trees to splintered ruin. But there was no machine for this job, no safe method waiting in the wings. The only answer was to send a man up the trunk, higher than anyone had dared to climb for pay. So began the era of the tree topper. In camp ledgers and on payroll slips, the title first appears alongside the usual ranks of fallers and buckers. The job was as simple as it was terrifying. Climb to the very top of a living giant, cut away the crown, and survive the descent. Every step up the trunk meant trusting gear that was little more than sharpened metal spurs and a leather belt. There were no harnesses, no nets, no second chances. The trees swayed in the wind. The ground far below disappeared into mist, and the only thing holding a man aloft was his own grip and nerve. Tree toppers became a breed apart, spoken of in hushed tones in the bunkhouses. They earned a reputation for recklessness, but the truth was more complicated. The job existed because nothing else worked. Without toppers, the largest trees couldn't be harvested. Profits would stall, and the camps would fold. The solution to the industry's biggest problem was a new kind of worker, one who climbed into danger so others could stay on the ground. A tree topper's life hung on a few pounds of iron and a length of rope. The equipment, if it could be called that, was simple and unforgiving. Climbing spurs, forged from steel and sharpened to a 3-inch spike, were strapped to the inside of each boot. With every step, the spike bit into the bark, searching for solid wood beneath the surface. But in a tree that had weathered centuries, the line between firm and rotten could shift without warning. The only thing keeping a man from falling backward was a single rope belt, usually 3/4 of an inch thick. Most were made of hemp, rough against the palms, and prone to fraying where they rubbed the trunk. The belt wrapped around the tree and hooked back to itself, forming a loop that the climber would lean into, shifting it higher with each kick of the spurs. There was no backup, no modern harness, no net waiting below. If the rope snapped or the spurs slipped, there was nothing to break the fall but the ground. The rest of the gear was just as basic. A crosscut saw, hung from a sling over the shoulder, heavy and awkward, its teeth rattling with every movement. An axe rode at the hip, blade exposed, ready to clear limbs or start the first notch in the crown. Some climbers carried a small pouch of wedges or a coil of lighter line for rigging, but every extra ounce was another burden on the way up. Nothing was designed for comfort or safety. The spurs could gouge deep into a boot if they slipped. The rope belt dug into ribs and hips, leaving bruises that lasted for days. In winter, the hemp stiffened and burned the skin. In rain, it turned slick and treacherous. Equipment failures were common, but replacements were hard to come by. Most men patched their gear with whatever they could find, trusting in luck as much as skill. This was not the equipment of a profession that expected its workers to last. Each piece was a reminder. Up here, the smallest flaw could mean the end. A tree topper's climb began with more than just nerve. Every ascent meant hauling a cross-cut saw that weighed close to 30 pounds, the steel blade slapping against a thigh with each step. An axe, heavy and awkward, bounced at the hip. Some carried wedges or a coil of rope, every tool adding to the load. The combined weight pressed down on shoulders and hips, making each foot of progress a test of endurance. The climb itself was not a steady rise. Old-growth trunks were rarely straight, forcing a man to circle the tree, spurs biting into bark that could turn from solid to rotten in a heartbeat. The higher he climbed, the more the world changed. With every gust of wind, the tree began to move. Even on a calm day, a 200-foot fir could sway as much as 3 feet from side to side. In a storm, it was more. The motion was slow but relentless, a rolling arc that made balance a constant battle. Climbers described the sensation as standing on the deck of a ship in heavy seas, the ground vanishing and reappearing far below. The saw, meant for 2 men on the ground, felt twice as heavy in the air. Each time the tree bent, the tool swung out, threatening to pull the climber off balance. The rope belt, rough and unyielding, dug into ribs and hips, leaving raw skin and bruises. Hands cramped from gripping the trunk. Boots slipped as spurs struggled for purchase in rain or icy fog. Every muscle ached long before the top was in sight. There was no way to predict the next sway. A sudden gust could send the crown lurching, forcing the climber to cling tight and ride it out. Some men learned to time their movements to the rhythm of the wind, pausing until the tree settled, then inching upward again. Others never got used to the motion. The fear of a rotten patch or a snapped belt was always there, just beneath the surface. But the job demanded speed as well as caution. The crew below watched the treetop, waiting for the sign that the crown was ready to fall. Up above, the climber worked against exhaustion, gravity, and the tree itself, knowing that a single misstep could mean a fall no one survived. On payday, the difference between life on the ground and life in the treetops came down to a few coins. The daily wage for a treetopper in 1925 was $5.25, paid in cash, handed over at the end of a shift. It was a slight premium over what a bucker or a faller earned, but not by much. The added risk, the possibility of a 200-foot fall, bought a man maybe an extra $1 a day. For most, that meant a weekly take-home of less than $40, minus the cost of board and gear repairs. There were no bonuses for danger, no insurance policies, no promises if things went wrong. Payroll cards from the era, yellowed and creased, list names and amounts in a careful hand. There is no space for hazard pay, no column for death benefits. The cash changed hands in the camp office, sometimes with a nod, sometimes with a warning. For men who climbed, the money was just enough to keep them coming back, but never enough to make the risk feel justified. In the context of the times, $5.25 a day was more than a farmhand could expect, and less than a skilled tradesman in the city. During the boom years, logging companies advertised these wages in newspapers up and down the coast, promising steady work to anyone willing to climb. Immigrants, drifters, and men down on their luck answered the call, drawn by the prospect of cash in hand and a meal at the end of a long day. But the cost was measured in more than dollars. The extra pay did not account for the battered bodies, the chronic pain, or the empty bunks left behind after a fall. There was no compensation for families, no pension for the men who didn't come home. The companies paid what they had to, and not a cent more. In the end, the wage of risk was a number on a ledger, never enough to balance what was lost in the trees. Statisticians never haunted the camps, but the numbers survived in rumor and ledger. For every 10 men who climbed, 7 would not last to see the end of their working years. The figure, 70%, was whispered in bunkhouses and scribbled in union petitions. In 1923, the International Woodworkers Union submitted a grievance demanding hazard pay for high climbers. The petition included a grim tally. Toppers died at a rate unmatched by any other job in the woods. The evidence was not just in stories, but in accident sketches and company logs, where one fall blurred into the next. The mechanisms of death were as varied as the trees themselves. The most common was a simple slip, a spur kicked out from rotten wood, and the climber dropped through open air, 200 feet or more. There was no harness, no backup line, just gravity and the ground. Some men vanished into the hollow cores of ancient trunks. The the heartwood crumbling beneath their weight. Others met their end from above, struck by falling limbs known as widowmakers. These branches, heavy as anvils, broke free without warning, snapping loose in the wind or under the saw's vibration. A single blow could kill a man instantly, or send him tumbling from the crown. Sometimes the trees themselves turned traitor. The top might snap while being cut, the climber still perched on the swaying trunk. The sudden release sent both man and timber crashing down. On rare occasions, the tree split up the middle, a hidden seam opening as the saw bit deeper, leaving the climber stranded or crushed between halves. Wasp and hornet nests added another layer of terror. Disturbed at the top, a swarm could drive a man to panic, his grip loosening as stings rained down. Each of these dangers was recorded in the margins of camp life. Coffins were stacked behind the cookhouse, ready to be filled. Crew bosses sketched the scene of a fall in notebooks, noting the weather, the hour, the cause. In some camps, a breakfast ritual settled the odds. Men eyed each other over coffee, guessing who would not return for supper. The numbers added up in silence, year after year, as the work continued. No official tally captures the full cost. The only certainty is that the death rate among tree toppers dwarfed that of any other logging job. The risks were not theoretical or distant. They were present in every ascent, every notch cut into the ancient wood. For the men who climbed, each day's survival was a matter of chance, not skill. The forest gave no second warnings. It only demanded payment, again and again. Frank McAllister's name appeared in the Aberdeen Herald on a gray morning in February 1915. He was 26, with a wife and a newborn son in a rented house near the Grays Harbor camps. McAllister had been a tree topper for just over a year. The obituary was brief, a single column, tucked between shipping news and a notice for a church supper. It reported that his spur slipped while he was nearly 160 feet above the ground, halfway through cutting the crown from a Douglas fir. The wood beneath his boot had rotted unseen. One moment he was balanced against the sway, saw in hand. The next, he was gone. Crewmen on the ground said it happened so fast they barely had time to shout. The fall broke every bone. That night, his bunk stayed empty. The company sent a telegram to his wife and paid out the week's wages, minus the cost of his tools. There was no funeral in camp, just a pine box sent back on the supply train. 16 years later, in the summer of 1931, the Daily Olympian carried a similar notice for Manuel Ortiz. Ortiz was 34, an immigrant from Sonora, Mexico, who sent most of his pay home each month. He was known for his quiet skill, never the fastest, but careful, always checking his belt and spurs before a climb. That July morning, the crew watched him disappear into the upper branches of a massive cedar, the trunk narrowing to a splintered crown. As he reached for his saw, he disturbed a nest hidden in the bark. Hornets swarmed his face and arms. Witnesses said he tried to shield his eyes, lost his grip, and fell through the branches. The descent was silent until the final crash. Ortiz's body was lowered with ropes, wrapped in a canvas tarp. The foreman wrote a letter to his brother in Tacoma. The camp cook later recalled how the men ate in silence that night, the clatter of tin cups muffled by the empty seat at the end of the table. Neither McAllister nor Ortiz left behind more than a handful of belongings and a few lines in a ledger. Their deaths were not unusual, nor were they the last. For each name recorded in a newspaper or a company book, there were others lost to memory, men who vanished from the trees and from history, mourned only in the moment by those who watched them fall. The statistics that haunted the camps became personal in the faces of men like McAllister and Ortiz. fathers, brothers, sons, each drawn skyward by the promise of a day's wage and undone by a single misstep. The tragedies were not just numbers. They were the silent burden carried by every man who strapped on spurs and looked up into the green shadows above. Joseph Klein's name was written into the Hensley Camp diary on June 3, 1922. He was 31, a high climber by trade, with a reputation for singing under his breath as he worked his way up a trunk. That morning, the camp woke to the smell of frying salt pork and the clatter of tin plates. Klein ate alone, eyes fixed on the steam curling from his mug. Around him, the others watched in silence. In the logging camps, breakfast was more than a meal. It was a kind of reckoning. Men studied each other, searching for signs of dread or resignation. Some called it the breakfast test, the quiet measure of who would climb and who might not come back. Klein's gear was laid out by his bunk: spurs, belt, saw, and axe, each checked and rechecked. The belt, a thick length of hemp, had been patched twice that spring. It was the only thing that would keep him from falling if the spurs lost their grip. As he strapped on his boots, a few men nodded in his direction. No one spoke. Superstition ran deep in the woods. To wish a climber luck was to tempt fate. By mid-morning, Klein was halfway up a Douglas fir, his silhouette a dark mark against the sky. The tree swayed under his weight, each gust of wind making the trunk tremble. Crewmen on the ground watched, hands shading their eyes. The saw's teeth bit into the living wood, sending shivers down the trunk. Then a sharp crack, a sound that cut through the forest like a shout. The belt snapped. Klein's body fell, tumbling through branches, striking the earth with a force that left no doubt. He was gone before the crew reached him. The Hensley diary notes the time: 10:17 a.m. The entry is brief. Klein fell from the big fir. Belt broke. Bury him tomorrow. There was no ambulance, no doctor called. The camp cook hammered together a pine coffin from boards meant for bunk repairs. It was one of several kept ready behind the cookhouse, built in the quiet hours after supper, just in case. Death was not an interruption in camp life. It was an expected visitor. When a man died, the work paused only long enough to lower the box into a shallow grave at the edge of the clearing. Then the saws started up again. At supper, the men ate in near silence. The empty seat at the far end of the table was a reminder of what the forest demanded. Some men drank more than usual. Others finished their meals quickly and disappeared into the dark. The next morning, another climber laced his boots and checked his belt. The routine never changed. The coffins behind the cookhouse stayed stocked, and the breakfast test continued. In the world of the tree toppers, ritual was the only shield against the fear that waited in the trees. By 1930, the Pacific Northwest was a magnet for men with nowhere else to go. The Great Depression had closed factories and emptied farms from Minnesota to California. In the census that year, unemployment touched 12% nationwide, but in logging towns, it was higher still. Desperation filled the bunkhouses. 40% of the men who signed on in the camps were immigrants: Swedes, Finns, Italians, Mexicans, and dozens more. Each one carrying the hope of sending money home or simply surviving another winter. The forests offered what the cities could not: a job, paid in cash, no questions asked. But the promise came with a catch. Logging companies posted notices in rail depots and hiring halls, advertising steady work in the woods. They did not mention the odds. For many, the choice was an illusion. There was no safety net, no union strong enough to protect the new arrivals. Families back home waited for letters that sometimes never came. The men who climbed did so because there was nothing left to lose. Some had fled crop failures in the Midwest. Others had crossed the ocean only to find the factories shuttered. In the camps, they became numbers on a payroll, faces in a crowd, bodies willing to risk everything for a wage that barely covered the cost of boots and board. The trees did not care where a man came from. Hunger and hope drove them up the trunks, higher than fear should allow. The forest became a last refuge and, for too many, a final resting place. In the bunkhouses and mess halls, the legend of the tree topper took on a life of its own. Camp songs told of men who could climb faster than a squirrel, who laughed in the face of storms and swung their saws above the clouds. In 1919, a chant echoed through the camps from Gray's Harbor to Coos Bay. Up he goes, never mind the wind that blows. The words painted toppers as half-mad daredevils, men who taunted death for sport and came down grinning for supper. Stories grew taller with each retelling. A single climb became a feat of strength, a brush with the supernatural. Bravado filled the air, but the reality was far colder. Behind the songs and swagger, the companies kept their own records. A 1924 set of meeting minutes from a timber firm in Oregon spelled out the calculation in plain terms. Operational cost per high climber, acceptable loss. The men who risked everything for a day's pay were reduced to a number in a ledger, their lives weighed against board feet and profit margins. There was no mention of danger in the job notices, no warning in the pay envelopes. The myth of the fearless climber served a purpose. It kept the bunkhouses full, the saws moving, and the questions quiet. One logger, quoted in a 1932 letter, put it simply, "You had to act like you didn't care. If you hesitated, you were finished." Pride became armor, and the myth became a shield. But in the end, the stories did nothing to protect the men who climbed. The company sang along, then sent another man up the tree. By the early 1970s, a new set of rules changed the fate of those who worked among the trees. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, set the first federal safety standards for logging in 1971. For the first time, companies faced real consequences for ignoring the dangers their workers faced. Hard hats, harnesses, and strict protocols replaced the old tools and rituals. The fatality rate for loggers, once among the highest of any profession, dropped below 2%, a fraction of what it had been in the era of the tree toppers. The cost of progress is written in the ledgers and in the earth itself. Historians estimate that between 1880 and 1940, as many as 4,200 men may have died in the treetops of the Pacific Northwest. Most left behind little more than a name in a paybook or a grave on the edge of a clearing. Their stories faded as the forests fell and the world moved on. Yet the legacy of the tree toppers endures, not just in the stumps scattered across ghost forests, but in the hard-won safety standards that protect workers today. To honor those who climbed before, consider supporting the preservation of forest history at local archives and museums. Share the true stories of these forgotten workers so their sacrifices are not lost to time. And if you have family ties to the old camps, record and contribute those memories. Every name matters in the tally of the past. Today, the forests that once demanded these deaths are mostly gone. Less than 5% of old-growth stands remain in the Pacific Northwest. The silence over what it costs to clear them still shapes how we value both labor and land. As we debate the price of progress, those vanished lives haunt every fallen giant. Their sacrifice is buried, but the question of what we are willing to trade for growth endures. Share your thoughts below.